welcome, bienvenue. Today we have a press conference with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. My name's Jim Bronskill. I'm with the Canadian Press. I'll be moderating. To my right, we have Brian Lee Crowley. We have Robert Knox and John Robson. Each of them has a brief statement, and there will be time for questions. Brian, please proceed.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. The Macdonald-Laurier Institute is now 3 months old, and in that time we've been very active. We published Free to Learn, a paper about Aboriginal post-secondary education in March. We also published our first book, The Canadian Century, that has received a substantial amount of critical acclaim and comments since its release a few weeks ago. And today we are very pleased to release Citizen of One, Citizen of the Whole. Merci d'être venu à ce lancement de notre nouvelle publication Citoyen de l'une, citoyen de toutes. Dans cette étude, on fait appel au gouvernement fédéral d'employer son pouvoir constitutionnel indéniable afin de revendiquer les libertés économiques des Canadiens. In this study, we are making the case for our federal government to use its clear constitutional authority to vindicate the economic rights of Canadians. Economic freedom, the freedom to exercise your profession or your skills, to sell your goods or services, to buy the goods or services that you want, are just as important as freedom of speech or conscience or religion. But governments in this country have been weak and vacillating in protecting these economic freedoms, and this has hurt Canada in many ways. One way that we have been harmed is that barriers to exercising our economic freedoms make Canada less efficient and therefore less rich than it might have been. But provincial and federal measures and policies that impede and restrict trade, in addition to doing economic harm, do something far worse. They make us less of a nation. Only the national government can ensure that Canada has an open, efficient, predictable, and stable domestic market where all Canadians are treated equally and fairly. Seul le gouvernement national est en mesure d'assurer que l'espace économique canadien est ouvert, prévisible, efficace et stable, et qu'on accorde aux Canadiens un traitement équitable et égal à l'intérieur de cet espace. The founders of our nation clearly wanted to make Canada one economic space to prevent a harmful, protectionist, beggar-thy-neighbor free-for-all. Throughout the world, one of the universal powers granted to national governments within federations is the trade and commerce power. That is the power to create a single national economic space, to grant all citizens equal rights to buy, sell, trade, and work. This was clearly part of the scheme of Confederation. It's one of the main reasons advanced by Confederation's proponents for the creation of Canada in the first place. Indeed, the title of our paper is drawn from one of the most eloquent defenses of Canada in the lead up to 1867. Speaking in 1865, George Brown proclaimed, "The proposal now before us, Confederation, is to throw down all barriers between the provinces to make a citizen of one, citizen of the whole." Canada's founders believed that it is a serious affront to human dignity to deny a person the right to pursue their calling, and it is therefore statesmanship of the highest order to create a nation where it will not be allowed to happen. That's why men like Brown and Macdonald favored Confederation and opposed interprovincial trade restrictions, and why Sir Wilfrid Laurier, years later, praised, and I quote, freedom. Freedom in every sense of the term, freedom of speech, freedom of action, freedom in religious and civil life, and last but not least, freedom in commercial life. Only a failure of federal nerve has prevented the forceful exercise of this clear power. And that failure of nerve, motivated chiefly by a fear of offending the provinces, leaves vital interests of Canadians unprotected and gives them no recourse when some of their vital rights are not respected. The federal government should pass an act of Parliament to create an economic charter of rights for Canadians that would be faithful to this vision of 1867, while respecting the constitutional division of powers and responsibilities between the provinces and Ottawa. We further recommend in this paper the creation of an Economic Freedom Commission with the power to investigate breaches of the Economic Charter of Rights on its own initiative, as well as in response to complaints. In a nutshell, that is what Citizen of One, Citizen of the Whole is all about. I'm now going to ask my colleague Robert Knox to provide you a bit of historical context as to how this goal has been something apparently just beyond our reach as a nation. Bob.
Thank you, Brian. I spent a good part of my latter working career in the field of interprovincial trade negotiations. So, having served as the executive director of the Internal Trade Secretariat during the negotiations of the Agreement on Internal Trade in the early 1990s, I think I can offer a certain perspective that may not always be understood by observers outside that process. First, I can say categorically that the Agreement on Internal Trade is a flawed and ineffective undertaking. It's partial, equivocal, and has limited commitment to free trade in Canada. It's complex, it's opaque, it's unenforceable, and inaccessible to those who try to apply it. It protects provincial interests as much as it opens up provincial markets. And it ignores the reality that governments create barriers, and Canadians, individuals and businesses, are the ones who have to deal with them. If we want to protect Canadians, we can't do it with intergovernmental agreements. I believe that the only way to protect the economic rights of all Canadians in every province and territory is through the creation of a National Charter of Economic Rights that is enforceable in the courts as we suggest in our paper. The enforceability factor is critical and is why we also have a need for an Economic Freedom Commission. My experience has shown that provinces don't have the constitutional authority or even the desire to create such rules and mechanisms. The power rests with the Government of Canada, our federal government, and as we look to the future, we believe that Canadians need their governments to work together to establish a truly open domestic market where people, goods, services, and finance can move freely and effectively for the benefit of all. This is how we can enrich the lives of Canadian individuals, families, and businesses. This should be our collective objective, and most of all, we need the federal government to use their constitutional authority to make it happen. And John, over to you.
Governments in Canada face a lot of difficult challenges. Some of them are extremely problematic, both intellectually and politically. And that's why our proposal, which is comparatively straightforward, isn't just desirable in itself. It's also important in improving the environment for making these other decisions. The proposals that we offer would improve the performance of the economy. That means more tax revenue for governments to meet demands on them. It also means reducing the demands on government because citizens are doing better. And it improves the mood in the country for tackling more difficult reforms. If these measures are undertaken, we say that will improve prosperity, and that's a good thing. But also, and this is the core of the proposal, to make us citizens of one nation instead of being divided into economically hostile separate units. That's the core of what George Brown was talking about. And if governments find themselves needing to make difficult decisions, politically difficult, asking people to make sacrifices, that sense that we belong to a common nation, that we're all in this together, is very important to tackling these things in the right spirit and getting through them properly. That's why this is important, not just for the economy, but for the nation as a whole, for our sense of common citizenship. That's why we're putting this paper out today. It lays out reasons for action, it lays out justifications for action, and it lays out a specific course of action that only the federal government can pursue to make us wealthier, to improve our prospects for political reform, and to make us more citizens of one nation.
That's our presentation.
Okay, we have time for questions.